From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. At 8 a.m. on Thursday morning, a convoy of unmarked police cars drove up the long drive of the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. That in itself is not unusual. The place is often crawling with royal protection officers, but that's not who these officers were. They drove up to a cottage on the estate, the new residence of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, and neither he nor his brother, the king, knew they were coming.
This is some major breaking news this morning.
And get to some breaking news that is happening as we speak in the United Kingdom.
In the last couple of moments, extraordinary news.
Former Prince Andrew has been arrested.
The monarchy will be cooperating in the investigation.
It's an extraordinary revelation and development on this story.
On his 66th birthday, the former prince was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. He's denied all wrongdoing. The arrest has plunged the royal family into their greatest crisis since the death of Princess Diana. So what does this mean for the future of the British monarchy? The story today: Andrew is arrested.
I was at home doing some work and I got a message from another broadcaster saying, given the big breaking news, and I thought, what big breaking news? And I had to quickly look up to see Andrew had been arrested. And I've got to say, I was completely shocked.
Valentine Low is the former royal correspondent for The Times. These days, he lives a quieter life writing books. We yanked him out of retirement for the big news.
We knew that the police activity was ongoing, but the idea that they could turn up at his place in Sandringham and arrest him was, on the cards, but shocking, and it shows what a big trouble the royal family is in.
Valentine, you've covered royal weddings, royal funerals. I mean, the royal family over decades. This is almost unimaginable.
It is. I mean, I think if I think about what the other big stories were, comparable one was, Harry and Meghan and them leaving the royal family and Harry saying all that stuff about the royal family. It's a different sort of story, but it's one of the most momentous royal stories of recent times. And it was completely unimaginable. It was completely shocking. And, we can only slowly digest what it's going to mean to the royal family. But it's definitely going to have a serious impact.
Valentine, just remind us, we can't say very much right now because there has been an arrest, but what do we know?
Well, we know that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has been arrested at his home in Sandringham. We know that police have searched his property at Sandringham where he's living and also his former home at Windsor Royal Lodge. We know that they can hold him for 24 hours. Obviously, no charges have been brought. And we know that the king has released a statement pretty quick, within a couple of hours or so after the arrest became publicly known, basically saying the law must take its course. And that's about it for the moment. We obviously don't know if any charges will be brought. That remains to be seen. It's an unfolding story. It's an ongoing news story. Most exciting type.
What has he been arrested for?
He's been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. This relates to emails he allegedly sent in his time as trade envoy to Jeffrey Epstein and also to his banker friend, Jonathan Rowland, which again allegedly involved passing on confidential government reports.
And Valentine, we should say it's a particularly bad day for what was the House of York because it's also his 66th birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday, Andrew.
What a way to celebrate.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. His humiliation knows no bounds. Yet another humiliating episode for Andrew.
Well, Valentine, just remind us of that succession of humiliating episodes. It's been a rocky few months for him.
It's been a rocky few months following a rocky few years. The latest episode started when various emails allegedly from Andrew started emerging, including various communications which claimed to show that he had asked his Scotland Yard protection officers to look into Virginia Giuffre, which would have been completely inappropriate. The pressure started building up on Andrew, and in the middle of October, he released a statement saying that he wasn't going to use his titles anymore. But the public clamour and the media clamour wasn't going away. 2 weeks after that, the King released a statement which basically stripped Andrew of his titles as Duke of York and of Prince, and also said that he was going to be leaving Royal Lodge. This ludicrously large mansion, Royal Lodge in Windsor, that really did seem to be a low point for Andrew. But the low points have continued.
They certainly have. Returning to the arrest, what exactly is the offence he's suspected of committing?
So misconduct in public office is actually a very old offence. It dates back several hundred years.
Dr. Tom Frost is a senior lecturer at Loughborough University, and he's written about this section of the law.
It's what we call a common law offence, which means it was developed by the judges rather than Parliament. It deals with a situation where a public official willfully neglects to perform their duty or willfully commits misconduct to such a degree as to amount to an abuse of the public's trust without lawful excuse. It's a very serious offence as well. It does carry a maximum sentence of life imprisonment.
And, we should just again specify that this is nothing to do with the allegations of sexual misconduct, which Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has always denied too. And the royal family have said that they'll be cooperating with any investigation.
They have, and I think it's worth reiterating to your listeners that we are dealing with an unprecedented situation. And to have the King, as head of state that he would be willing to cooperate with the police investigation. We haven't had a monarch interviewed by police potentially or give evidence in a criminal investigation. So again, this is new ground that the police will have to try and find a way through.
That is extraordinary. Is there the potential that the King would have to give evidence? Will he be interviewed?
If this were what I would say an ordinary investigation dealing with a general member of the public, then the police would ordinarily interview anyone who's relevant. And that may include anyone who's had a conversation with or discussion about or have any knowledge of the suspected criminal offence. We don't yet know in detail what the full evidence is that the police have. We don't yet know any other members of the royal family have any knowledge that could assist the police. But potentially, if the King does have knowledge that pertains to this investigation, then we could see him giving a statement to police, which again, simply, well, number one, hasn't happened before. And number two, they're his police. They are His Majesty's constabulary. Again, this is very new ground.
If this does go to court, would that be Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor versus the Crown, effectively?
It would, yes. And the Crown would be in the name of the King. So in English law, the only person to have immunity is the head of state, the King. And I should state that's not unusual. That happens in every country. The head of state has immunity. So as a senior member of the royal family, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor would not have immunity from criminal or civil charges.
Can you give us any details into what they'll actually be investigating in this case? Is this about details in the Epstein files or more than that?
It does seem that the latest batch of documentation from the Epstein files released in the United States has been a catalyst to this. We saw that again with the investigation of Peter Mandelson as well. It should again be said that just because, and this is the case with any person, if you are arrested for one offence, that doesn't preclude the police looking at other criminal offences that evidence points towards. Kind of a classic example you get if you're a first-year law student. If you get arrested for common assault and the police search your property and find a load of stolen TVs, they can still arrest you for the stolen TVs. So ultimately, the police will follow the evidence.
And Tom, as you say, this is a law that has been around for centuries, but it is notoriously hard to get a conviction on this charge. Tell us why that is.
I'd say it's notoriously hard to get a conviction against senior public officials. The problem here, of course, is that misconduct is not enough. It has to be misconduct that's so bad to amount to an abuse of the public's trust. That isn't defined. It's a very old offence. That's up to a jury. It's very difficult to get 12 people in a room to define what is so bad to amount to an abuse of the public's trust. Ironically, out of the convictions who we know the identities of those convicted, 98% were against junior officials. 92% of those convicted since 2014 has been against police or prison staff. If you're a police officer involved in a relationship with a suspect, or if you're a prison officer smuggling in contraband, that's easy. It's straightforward. That's a clear abuse. If you are a journalist or a politician, the courts have said, actually, there's a very high threshold. Operation Elvedon was about 10 years ago, where a lot of journalists were prosecuted for misconduct in public office to do with the phone hacking scandal. A lot of those convictions were overturned because the judges, senior judges, said a free press is more important than convicting people for this offence. So there's been a reluctance to convict senior politicians and senior journalists because it's very ill-defined. It could be abused. And again, some of your listeners may remember the expenses scandal 15 years ago. The MPs and peers who were convicted were actually convicted of theft or fraud offences. They weren't convicted of misconduct in public office. The Law Commission recommended in 2020 that this offence be replaced. The Law Commission is not party political. They are there to see whether the law is working or it's fit for purpose. They recommended it be replaced with separate offences, one of which is corruption in public office, which effectively commits acts causing a gain for themselves or a loss for another, and they do so wrongfully. The wording used in the new offences, it's all well-known legal terms that have clear definitions in law, unlike the previous offence. The current government, the Labour government, has instituted a bill to replace misconduct in public office. That's also known as the Hillsborough Law because it deals with a lot of duties of candour in relation to public officials and police forces. That is currently being debated in Parliament. It's likely it will be passed. It will be an improvement to the law, and hopefully it will allow for more senior forms of wrongdoing to be successfully prosecuted.
So, just to clarify, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has been arrested on suspicion of committing this offence, but this offence might itself change within months, and yet no new law, which is easier to prosecute, would be applicable to him.
No, and that's a standard principle in English law. If you do something today that's not a crime, you can't be retrospectively punished for it. So if the alleged actions had taken place after this new law had been passed and was in force, then it would be much clearer route to prosecute, and the offence would be much easier for the state to make out. It will still be possible to pursue a prosecution for misconduct in public office. When the law changes like this, what we call prosecutions in train, or say existing court cases, will be allowed to complete. It should also be noted that investigations of Peter Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor are taking place in different police forces. So we don't need to read too much into the fact that we have one arrest in one case and no arrest in the other. The key fact is both individuals are under investigation. What happens next, or whether anyone is charged, or when a charge will be given by the Crown Prosecution Service. If it's dealing with complex matters and complex financial information, that may take time. We may be dealing with weeks, we may be dealing with months. Listeners should not be too concerned if they don't hear very much in the foreseeable future. The police are still doing their job, and this is totally normal, especially for a complex investigation.
What does this mean for the future of the monarchy? How are the royal family dealing with the news of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's arrest? Our veteran royal watcher, Valentine Low, is on hand. Valentine, you've been telling us about this latest episode in the life of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. It started off so differently. Just remind us of his, before the whiff of scandal, of his place in the royal family. I mean, he was the favourite son.
Well, everyone says he was the favourite son of the late Queen, and I don't know that that's not true, but I think journalists repeat it without ever questioning it. I think we can probably agree that Charles was not the Queen's favourite son, but, when he was a young man, he served in the Royal Navy as a helicopter pilot. He served in the Falklands War at some danger to himself. People admired him. He had quite a good reputation. He was a bit of a ladies' man, but, people quite liked that in a young man. He got married to Sarah Ferguson, and, in the early months they're married, certainly around the time of their wedding, they were regarded as a breath of fresh air, weren't they? They were unstuffy, they were kind of young and they were fun, but soon they became seen as rather crass and rather boorish. And then his marriage fell apart, and that wasn't good. And gradually his reputation became more and more tarnished. And, when he was a trade envoy, when he first started off being a trade envoy.
Well, tell us about that, because in a way it was sort of hard for him to find a role for a very long time.
It was hard for him to, so he left the Navy. I think his career in the Navy came to an end. I mean, he'd done jobs which he'd been good at, flying helicopters. A bit like Harry, he was good at flying helicopters, but not necessarily good at anything else. Certainly not good at leadership, I don't think. So he left the Royal Navy, and if we're being frank, Manveen, he's too thick and too arrogant to be of much use to anyone.
I mean, Valentine, tell us what you really think.
Exactly. Anyway, someone cooked up an idea that they could make him a trade envoy. So beating the drum for British trade overseas. And he was rather foisted on the Department of Trade and Industry, and I don't think they really knew what to do with him. But his private secretary at the time kind of worked out that there were places, there were situations where he could be of use.
What exactly would that role entail?
Well, trying to help British trade overseas, trying to talk to people, trying to open up business opportunities, trying to deals that have been stuck. I mean, someone once told me that, there were parts of the world where he was useful. He was useful in the Middle East, where they like royal families, and members of royal families can sometimes have access and have influence where a politician couldn't necessarily do so. And also in around all the stands, Kazakhstan and so on. And according to someone I spoke to, who had no reason not to tell the truth, said, they used to get letters from businesses saying, thank you so much. There's been this deal in wherever in the Middle East that's been stuck for years, and thanks to Andrew's effort, that blockage has been opened up. So that was all great. But also, there were plenty of tales that said he wasn't any use. He was actually as much of a hindrance as anything else. And there was a famous occasion in 2002. This is so that he hadn't been trade envoy for very long, and he goes to Bahrain. And one of the things he's meant to be doing is helping the sale of British Hawk aircraft to Bahrain. And what does he do? He goes to the king and says that it might be a better deal for the king if he leased them instead of bought them, which was not what he was meant to do. Absolutely extraordinary behaviour, because Andrew
just went rogue.
Is one of these people. He went rogue because he's one of these people who thinks he knows better. He doesn't know better, but he thinks he does, and it's a dreadful combination.
And in this role as trade envoy, which, as you say, was a bit hit and miss, was he paid?
No, he wasn't paid. He used to get money from the Queen. The figure that gets bandied around all the time is he used to get £249,000 a year, which I think, Manveen, most people could live on. I don't know if you could, but most people could live on that.
I think that's a reasonable amount as a stipend.
And he could charge his expenses. But of course, his expenses were pretty eye-watering. If he went somewhere and was offered the opportunity to stay in the official residence of the British ambassador or high commission or whatever it was, he'd often turn that down and would rather stay in the fancy hotel in town, which obviously cost the British government a lot more money.
Yeah. I suppose, there was a strong argument that he would bring a bit of royal stardust. As you say, there were some deals he would be able to get done that a government official couldn't. Was it a role the palace was keen on him doing?
Well, that's an interesting question, because we read, and I don't know if it's true, but we read that Charles, who of course was Prince of Wales at the time, that Charles was not keen on this happening because he thought it was a disaster waiting to happen. And, there were other people who were aware of the dangers of him doing this. And someone was quoted saying that they weren't going to let British trade policy be determined by the location of the world's finest golf courses. Andrew, of course, always very keen to visit places where he could get in a round of golf at the same time. But one of the people who apparently, the Queen thought it was a good idea. I think she was very keen that Andrew found something useful to do with his time. And the other person who endorsed it, interestingly, was Peter Mandelson. They have a friend in common, they Andrew Mandelson, in the form of Jeffrey Epstein. But I can't ever imagine Peter Mandelson and Prince Andrew having much in common or much to say to each other.
So intriguing. And he stepped down from his role as trade envoy, actually, because
Manveen. He was stepped down, I think.
Yes, give us the actual version.
When the fuss about Epstein first surfaced, so that was after the News of the World published a picture of Andrew with Epstein in Central Park, after Epstein had served time for procuring young people from prostitution, I think was the charge. And awful lot of questions for Andrew. It was a big story for some time. And David Cameron, who was Prime Minister, expressed, confidence in him remaining as trade envoy. But behind the scenes, things were afoot. And a few months later, in July, it was announced that he was stepping down. This was cooked up by the Queen's private secretary, Sir Christopher Geidt, now Lord Geidt, and Number 10. And between them, they defenestrated Andrew. Andrew was on holiday in Canada at the time, I think with his daughters, and he was absolutely furious. He felt he'd been ambushed.
Wow. So not much of a stepping down, really. You're right. He really was told.
Exactly.
With this latest episode, with the news of an actual arrest, what does that mean for the monarchy? Has a royal ever been arrested before? How new is this?
I can't think of any example of a royal being arrested since Charles I during the English Civil War. That didn't end well for him, did it?
No.
Royals have been in court since then. Princess Anne famously was in court in 2002, I think it was, facing a charge over the Dangerous Dogs Act after her pit bull terrier was said to have bitten some kids in a park. But I don't think she was arrested. I'm sure she wasn't. She was just summoned to court and she pleaded guilty. So I don't think there's been anything like this. And you do wonder, obviously, all that's happened so far is he's been arrested. He certainly has not been charged. But if he's charged, and if it goes to court, if there's a court case, two huge ifs, you've got to think, what's going to happen? Because if he chooses to plead guilty, that is a huge humiliation for him. He's got to admit that he's done wrong. But if he doesn't plead guilty, he has to face a trial. And who knows what would come out in a trial? That could be equally bad. So it would place him on the horns of quite a tricky dilemma if all this was to go to that far. And of course, there's no suggestion at the moment that it will. But it's something to ponder, isn't it?
And we should say in the past, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has always denied all wrongdoing. What exactly has the king said about this? You said earlier that he's already issued a statement. Just give us that statement in full.
The king has said, I have learned with the deepest concern the news about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and suspicion of misconduct in public office. What now follows is the full, fair and proper process by which this issue is investigated in the appropriate manner and by the appropriate authorities. In this, as I've said before, they have our full and wholehearted support and cooperation. And he goes on to say, let me state clearly, the law must take its course. As this process continues, it would not be right for me to comment further on this matter. Meanwhile, my family and I will continue in our duty and service to you all. It's a fascinating statement. You wouldn't know this is a member of his own family he's talking about, would you? There's a great sense of distance, isn't there, in that statement, I think. And it shows the king trying to be on the right side of history, doesn't it?
Yeah. Valentine, we're told that the Queen has been out carrying out her duties as usual. They don't seem to be hiding, even though it has been quite awkward recently. A lot of heckling at big events.
Yes, the royal family can't hide. can they? As the late Queen said, she has to be seen to be believed. And they've been through this before, the royal family, haven't they? There have been other bad times when there's been terrible news and they know that, people are going to shout questions at them and so on and so forth. But it'd be much worse if they didn't show up. And although there might be hecklers, the sort of people who turn out for these occasions are, broadly speaking, supporters. So they know that whoever's there in the crowd will be 95% supportive. But the people who turn out for these things don't necessarily reflect wider public opinion.
And it hasn't always been plain sailing for the royal family, as we've touched on. But this does feel so much worse than even an annus horribilis.
It does. Annus horribilis, of course, that was a succession of different crises. This is one crisis which just keeps on rolling on. And that's why it's been so damaging, because more keeps coming out.
Valentine, is there a way in which this might actually help the royal family? To see that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor is not above the law, to see that the monarchy isn't just sort of closing ranks, might it help their reputation? I mean, what does it mean for the future of the monarchy?
It's hard to say because there are so many factors at play here. I see that argument that maybe so. And, if there's a charge, if there's a court case, and this all gets discussed in court, will it emerge that the royal family knew nothing, or did they know more than we realised? I think that will be prime factor in how the reputation of the royal family survives after all of this. And the other thing you've got to think about is, the very nature of having a family as the head of state, as the head of the nation. You think, well, it works well when you've got someone of such impeccable integrity and devotion to service as the late Queen. But of course, the corollary of all of that is, you can say, well, wouldn't it have been a disaster if Andrew had been born first? But on the other hand, if Andrew had been born first, he would have had a role in life and he would have had money, because he would have been the Prince of Wales, and therefore he would have had access to the Duchy of Cornwall. Because a lot of Andrew's problems, their root is his lack of money. He doesn't have an awful lot of money, at least not the sort of money he thinks he needs to sustain his lifestyle. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, of course, is in a similar financial situation, and she's quite happy.
Yeah.
But she doesn't have the same sense of entitlement. She's got more of a sense of duty. All these are interesting questions. I mean, my gut instinct is that in the long term, 10 years down the track, even 20, I think the royal family will survive this because it'll be seen to be an Andrew problem rather than a monarchy problem. But, I don't have huge confidence when I say that. It's just my gut instinct, and it could go wrong. I've always felt that the problems for the royal family are not scandal, they're apathy. What damages the royal family is people not being interested. And of course, we all know the younger generation are much less interested in the royal family. That's the danger for them, more than this very rocky period, this very damaging period caused by Prince Andrew. I'll be watching out for apathy rather than Andrew.
That was Valentine Low, former royal correspondent for The Times and now an author. And before that, you heard from Dr. Tom Frost, a senior lecturer at Loughborough University. You can follow every twist and turn of this story at thetimes.com or listen live on Times Radio. And don't forget to listen to our sister podcast, The Royals, for all the latest from our royal editors and everything they're hearing from inside the palace. This episode was produced by Taryn, Siegel and Olivia Case. The executive producer was Kate Lamble. Sound design and theme composition were by Malasetto. If you have any thoughts on what you've just heard, do drop us a line to thestory@thetimes.com or leave us a comment on Spotify. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.